January is supposed to feel fresh, a clean slate, new energy, new ambition. But for many of us living the corporate life, January feels heavy. You come back from the holidays and suddenly the machine switches back on. The inbox is full. Deadlines reappear, deals are live again, and everything you pushed under the carpet or procrastinated over in late December is back with vengeance. And somehow you're expected to be sharp, strategic, and driven. If that eagerness and motivation hasn't quite happened for you yet, let me say this up front. There is nothing wrong with you. Research consistently shows that January is actually the least productive month of the year, and task completion rates drop noticeably compared to autumn. Motivation dips and focus lags. Yet we tell ourselves a very different story, that January is when we should be on it. That if we don't feel energized, we're already behind. What happened with New Year, New Me? Welcome to the Escalation Podcast. I'm your host, Edita, and today I want to talk to you about the January blues, not as a weakness, but as a predictable structural reality of corporate life. And more importantly, how to reset without burning yourself out before the year has even begun. January is difficult for everyone, but it hits corporate professionals in a very particular way because there is no ramp up. You go from rest, hopefully some reflection, maybe a slower rhythm, straight back into cognitive intensity, complex decisions, high stakes, and constant demand for responsiveness. In corporate, you're not just managing time, you're managing egos, risks, and responsibilities, and that takes energy. What often gets mislabeled as lack of motivation in January is actually mental fatigue or executive fatigue, the kind that comes from decision-heavy work, not from laziness. But there's another layer to this, and it's one we rarely name. January creates a misalignment between your expectation and reality. You start your year with intentions, that shiny new gym membership, resolutions you genuinely meant, promises to yourself about how this year would be different, and then within the first week, corporate life snaps you back into place. Long days, back-to-back calls, the routine you're supposed to change is suddenly running you again. And it feels like those intentions are already slipping through your fingers. That's where the emotional weight comes back. Because it's not just that work is demanding, it's that it can feel like you're already losing before the year has even properly begun. Plus, there is the cultural pressure at play. January is where goals are announced, annual plans reviewed, strategies are reset, performance expectations quietly escalate again. So if you're feeling flat, slow, or slightly disconnected, it's easy to internalize it as personal failure. But it isn't. It's simply a mismatch between how humans recover and how corporate calendars operate. Here's the reframe I want to offer you. January is not about acceleration. It's actually about ramping back up. It's about stabilization. We tend to treat January as the start of full speed execution, as Q1 begins on January 1st. But biologically and psychologically and professionally, that makes very little sense. January is your transition month, a recalibration phase, yet we demand peak output. So instead of asking, why can't I get motivated? A better question is, what conditions do I need to build momentum? This is where January works best as a reset, not a restart, and definitely not a sprint. A reset allows you to stabilize first, rebuild capacity, and then accelerate with intention. Now, this isn't about lowering your standards, it's about sequencing effort intelligently, so pacing yourself, because momentum that's forced rarely lasts. Another important shift is this. January shouldn't just be about avoiding January blues. It should be about rebuilding your energy, that sense of engagement and mental aliveness, not constant excitement, but sustainable drive. In high-performance corporate environments, we tend to only notice energy when it's gone, and January is often the first warning signal. So let's talk about what this looks like in practice. First, let's temporarily refine productivity. In January, productivity isn't about volume. It's going to be about clarity. So fewer decisions, fewer unnecessary meetings, and definitely fewer self-imposed pressures. Ask yourself, what genuinely needs my best thinking this month and what can wait? That question alone can reduce cognitive overload dramatically. Second, set your quiet goals. Not public goals, not performative goals, quiet goals that are internal and are very intentional and aligned. They're about capability, not output. So, for example, re-establishing a morning routine, creating space for deeper work, getting back into physical movement. And a small but important caveat here, this isn't about signing up for an annual Barry's Bootcamp membership in a moment of January optimism. A simple morning coffee walk is more than enough to begin rebuilding momentum. These quiet goals are not designed to impress anyone on the outside. They create the conditions for excellence later. And that's senior level thinking. And thirdly, manage your energy, not just time. January happens in winter. Less daylight, lower baseline energy. You cannot out-hack biology. Instead, think in terms of energy protection. Aim for shorter, more focused work blocks, walking meetings when possible, implement slightly softer transitions between tasks, and being intentional about when you do your hardest thinking. One practical exercise I find really useful in January is a short audit. Not a grand planning session, I'm talking 10 minutes at most. I think of it as my cognitive map. So you take a piece of paper and you divide it into 3 columns. The first is decisions, things that only you can decide. The second is deliverables, what actually needs doing, what needs to be produced. And the third is drains, things that quietly consume your energy without moving anything forward. Inbox churn, Slack noise, meetings that exist largely because they always have. January isn't the month to optimize all of this, but to move the needle forward. So you'll now take that piece of paper and remove one drain and protect one decision every day. That alone will change how January feels, because mental fatigue is often less about workload and more about unnecessary friction. And finally, on a more personal note, for me, January has never been about charging forward. It's about easing back into depth, letting my thinking sharpen gradually, reconnecting with why I do what I do before I worry about how fast I'm doing it. Motivation doesn't arrive fully formed on January 2nd. It builds for me when my nervous system feels safe enough to engage again. And a brief word for those of you who are managing teams. January is often treated as a hard reset. Targets are back on, pressure is reapplied, expectations are quietly escalated. A few small adjustments can make an outsized difference for your team, like naming the January blues openly, even once. It would remove a surprising amount of unnecessary tension. Slightly lighter meeting schedules in the first week or 2 will also help. Fewer performative check-ins, more clarity around real priorities. These are the kind of intelligent, strategic moves you want to be considering. Teams don't need motivation speeches in January. They need fewer drains on their attention and a clearer sense of what actually matters this month. So if January feels slower for you, you're not behind. If your motivation hasn't returned yet, you're not failing. You're recalibrating. Ambition isn't proved by how hard you push in January. It's proved by how well you sustain yourself across the year and across your entire career. So as you move through this month, notice where and why you're applying pressure. January doesn't require intensity everywhere. It requires clarity and some refinement. Remove what drains your attention, protect your energy, and let momentum build where it's fully aligned and earned, and not when it's expected. Until next time, and happy January, everyone.